The cross we bear. Every person in this world carries their own cross, yet very few truly reflect on what that means. Not just in words, not as a familiar phrase we repeat in moments of fatigue or disappointment, but deeply, to the point where honest conversation with oneself begins. Because a cross is not just problems, it's how we live through them. In a small American town, where narrow streets each morning filled with the smell of fresh pastries from the little bakery on the corner, and the air was soft and slightly sweet from the blooming trees in spring, lived a woman named Emily Parker. She was 43 years old, yet there was something in her gaze that made one feel she had lived far more, each year of her life seemingly weighing twice as much as others. If someone stopped her on the street and asked how she was, she would likely smile with that restrained, polite smile that reveals nothing and answer, "I'm just carrying my cross." She had said this so often that the words had lost any real meaning, yet had simultaneously become her inner truth, her way of explaining a world that seemed to demand more from her than it gave in return. Her mornings began before dawn, when the darkness outside the window was thick and cold, and the town still slept, hidden beneath a thin blanket of nighttime silence. Emily would wake at 5, sometimes earlier, not because she wanted to, but because her life had long stopped asking about her desires. She would lie for a few seconds staring at the ceiling, and in those brief moments between sleep and reality, she felt the familiar heaviness settle somewhere in her chest, slowly yet surely reminding her of everything that lay ahead. The apartment was cold. Not the sharp, shocking kind of cold, but a slow, persistent chill that seeped into the bones and lingered. The heating barely worked, and every time she thought about turning up the warmth, bills would appear in her mind, impossible to pay. She would pull on a sweater, quietly rise so as not to wake the children, and head to the kitchen, where the old kettle began to hum softly, filling the small space with a sound that strangely seemed like the only sign of life at that early hour. Sometimes she would pause by the window, staring into the darkness without thinking of anything specific, simply looking, as if trying to find an answer that wasn't there. Her husband, Daniel, had left 5 years ago. There had been no loud arguments, no dramatic scenes worth recounting. There had been only silence. He had simply packed his things and gone, leaving behind a sense of emptiness that could not be filled with words or time. And with that emptiness, he left debts, responsibility, and 2 children who looked at her as if she were their only anchor. Her son, Jason, was in college. He was smart and diligent, and in his eyes still lived a hope that Emily herself had nearly lost. But that hope required money. Each of his calls began cautiously, as if he feared upsetting her. "Mom, I'm a little short." And she always answered, "It's okay, I'll figure something out," even when she had no idea how. Her daughter, Sophie, was younger and smaller. Asthma made every breath a struggle. There were nights when Emily would sit by her bed, listening to her breathe, counting each inhale as if it could keep her in this world. In those moments, her own troubles receded, though they never vanished. They simply waited. "This is my cross," she would say to a neighbor when asked how she was. "Everyone has their own," she added to colleagues. And each time the words sounded more like a verdict. She didn't notice how her life had become an endless loop, each day repeating the last, each emotion slightly weaker, slightly quieter, until only fatigue remained. She carried her pain as if it were something essential, something that defined her worth, and gradually that pain became the only thing she knew about herself. One November evening, when the rain persistently tapped on rooftops and puddles, Emily walked down a narrow street, feeling the cold seep through all layers of clothing, but even more acutely sensing that invisible pressure in her chest growing heavier with each step. Her shoulders twitched slightly from fatigue. Her heart felt as if every beat added weight. She saw no familiar faces, only the reflections of street lamps in the wet asphalt, flickering and seemingly smiling at her through the rain, reminding her that the world continued, even when she felt on the brink. Then she noticed the light spilling from a small church on the corner. It was warm and soft, like a blanket wrapping her after a long, sleepless day, and her feet, almost unconsciously, led her to the doors. Inside, silence reigned, deep, dense, so that even the sound of her own breathing seemed too loud. She sat on the last pew, leaning forward, letting tears roll freely down her cheeks, and felt the years of exhaustion and disappointment lift off her shoulders, if only for a moment. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, the words echoing in the emptiness of the church. An elderly priest with kind eyes appeared beside her, eyes reflecting patient wisdom that comes only after years of one's own pain and understanding of life in all its colors and shades. "Perhaps you are simply carrying it the wrong way," he said, sitting on the pew beside her. His voice didn't pressure, it offered space for reflection. "Allow me to tell you a story." Emily listened quietly, her heart beating faster, her mind, initially closed, slowly beginning to open. "Long ago there lived a woman very much like you," began the priest. "She too carried her cross, loneliness, poverty, sick children, feeling each day heavier, her shoulders narrower. One day she came to a wise man and begged, 'Give me another cross. This one is too heavy.'" He paused, letting the words settle in the air. Emily felt her own heart tighten at the familiar weight of those experiences. "The wise man led her to a large room filled with crosses of all shapes and sizes," the priest continued, his voice painting images in Emily's mind. "Some were enormous, heavy, with sharp edges that could cut into the flesh. Others seemed light, but betrayed their weight, as if made of lead. Some had narrow beams that cut the shoulders. Others were covered in splinters and thorns, making every movement painful." Emily felt each step of that woman within herself, as if walking the same path. She imagined how hard it was to bear a cross on her shoulders when the world seemed unkind and cold, her hands and back numb from the constant weight. And finally, in the far corner of the room, she found a cross that wasn't perfect, but felt familiar, comfortable in its discomfort, the priest continued. She lifted it with relief and said, "I will take this one." The wise man smiled. "It is the same cross you came with." The words were simple, yet in Emily's heart something new resonated. Her cross had never been a choice, but her attitude toward it could be. "You see," the priest added, "it's not about getting rid of your cross. It's about how we carry it. It's not punishment, not a curse. It's your life, your circumstances, your path. But you have turned it into a prison, into chains keeping you in one place, not allowing you to rejoice, love, laugh, or find meaning." Emily looked at him, not understanding at first, then whispered quietly, "I work, care for the children, try to survive. What else can I do?" The priest leaned forward, his eyes full of understanding. "When was the last time you laughed, not because you had to, but just because? When did you last notice beauty in the rain, not just the wet clothes? When did you last hug your children because you wanted to, not out of duty?" The words hit her like a slap that awakens. Emily closed her eyes, recalling moments when her heart had been open to the world, and realized there were almost none left. That night she cried, but her tears were not for self-pity, they were for awakening.
the understanding that her suffering had become her shield, not her weakness. The next morning, the world outside looked new. Dawn spilled gold and pink light across the wet asphalt, rooftops, and the faces of early passers-by. Emily, for the first time in many years, paused to inhale the dawn's fragrant air, feeling it in her chest as something alive, warm, and hers.
She prepared breakfast, sat with Jason and Sophie, and for the first time spoke with them not about debts, school, or illnesses, but about dreams, fears, and hopes. Every child's laugh, every spoken word filled her heart with warmth, and she realized her cross, though still heavy, was now her path, not her prison. She began noticing people at work not as additional burdens, but as separate worlds, with their own fears, hopes, and pains. The elderly woman alone in a ward, the young man after an accident, parents struggling for their children, all carried their crosses. She began to see that her own pain was only a part of this larger human tapestry and did not define her essence. Days passed, and the world outside changed along with Emily. She still woke at 5, still worked in the hospital, still felt financial pressure and worry for Sophie, who sometimes coughed so violently it seemed the world might collapse. But now her steps were lighter, even while carrying her cross. She let music quietly play in her headphones, sometimes swaying slightly as she cleaned, small movements bringing joy even in the most tiring moments. She enrolled in free English classes at the library, not because work demanded it, but simply because she had always dreamed of it. Every evening, she took Sophie on short walks, breathing the cold autumn air, sharing stories, laughing, exchanging little secrets that had previously been too hurried to discuss. Emily no longer complained, not because life had become easy. Financial struggles remained, Sophie sometimes sick, nights full of worry. No, now she understood that complaining does not lighten the cross. It only makes it heavier, like an extra stone on the shoulders. True strength is not in avoiding pain, but in embracing it, carrying it with dignity and a heart open to joy and love, even when it feels like there's barely strength to stand. One day, a neighbor invited her for coffee again, and Emily went. They sat at a small cafe, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with pastries and morning light streaming through the windows. When the conversation turned to hardships, Emily said, "You know, life is still hard, but now I'm learning to see what I already have. I have children who love me, I have a job, a roof over my head, the ability to learn and grow, even when it's hard. My cross is still heavy, but I don't drag it as a burden. I carry it as part of my path." The neighbor looked at her in surprise. "What happened to you? You're different." Emily smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. "I'm still the same," she said. "I just carry my cross differently now." A year passed. Jason graduated college and began working, helping his mother as he could. And Sophie improved thanks to a new doctor and attentive care. Emily received a small raise, but most importantly, she changed inside. She realized to carry one's cross in modern life is to accept responsibility without self-pity, to see beauty even in small things, to laugh when the heart wants to cry when it needs tears, and still move forward. Each day she reminded herself that her suffering does not define her essence. Hardship shapes character, but joy is an act of resistance, proof that the spirit cannot be broken. When helping patients, she noticed their fears, pain, and hopes, and understood that everyone carries their own cross. This awareness made her kinder, more patient, more open to the world. One spring day, Emily returned to the small church. The priest was there. his eyes shining with the same warmth as before. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked. "For showing me the difference between dragging a cross and carrying it. I used to drag mine like a dead weight. Now I carry it as part of my life. And you know what?" she added with a smile. "Even though it's still heavy, I don't break under it. I grow because of it." The priest nodded, his smile full of understanding. This is true strength. Not to avoid hardship, not to wait for an easy life, but to learn to bear one's cross with dignity, hope, and the ability to love. Moral. In our modern world, we often hear the phrase, "carry your cross," and many interpret it as passive endurance, humble acceptance of suffering, or justification for inactivity. We display our struggles like medals of perseverance, proof that life tested us and we survived. But the true meaning runs much deeper. To carry your cross is not to be a victim of circumstances. It is to choose how to respond to the life you are given. It is not to complain about its weight, but to find strength in every step forward. It is not to close your heart in pain, but to open it to love, joy, and warmth, even when the world seems against you. It is not to lose yourself in problems, but to discover your true self through trials, transforming pain into wisdom, suffering into depth. A cross is not a punishment. It is not a burden that breaks. It is weight that strengthens, an instrument that makes us stronger, more sensitive, more alive. Each of us carries a cross: illness, loneliness, poverty, betrayal, loss, fear. Crosses differ, but their essence is the same. Life tests our strength not to break us, but to show how strong we are, how deep our hearts, how vast our souls. We cannot always choose the cross we bear. Circumstances are often beyond our control. But we can always choose how we carry it, with bitterness or wisdom, with despair or hope, with self-pity or dignity, with complaints or gratitude. We can bear it as a crushing weight or as a path leading upward. Your cross is your story. Only you decide whether it will be a tragedy of a victim who did not give up or the epic of a hero who did not give up. Carry your cross not as a curse, but as a crown, not because you must, but because you can. And in that ability to carry it, in that choice, in that attitude, lies your true freedom.